Now, the International Criminal Court's chief prosecutor, of course, Karim Khan, has submitted requests for arrest warrants against Israeli leaders and Hamas leaders for a litany of alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity. Now, the point, of course, with the alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity lodged against Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, who's the defense minister, is these are crimes directly facilitated by Western states, not least the US, but also, of course, the UK. The arms, the diplomatic, political cover, but also there are commentators, outriders who have legitimized what I would argue is one of the great crimes of our age. We can't see Israel's crimes in isolation. Now, with that in mind, it's really important that I speak to Tayab Ali, who is an international lawyer, also with the International Center of Justice for Palestinians. Now, the work he and they are doing is really important. They've opened up an investigation into the complicity alleged of politicians here in Britain. And that investigation is about to be widened, which we will be discussing. Hey, Tab, how you doing?
Hi, how you doing, Wayne? Thanks for having me.
Right, let's just start. Actually, let's just start with, because if we're going to talk about complicity, if we're going to talk about the alleged criminal complicity, that's what we're talking about, the alleged criminal complicity of people in Britain, then we need to discuss what that actually means in terms of the charges leveled against these two Israeli leaders. So should we just start the ICC as a lawyer? Go through it with me. What in terms of relevant because of your case?
Yeah, so what's happened with the ICC is historic. You've heard that probably quite a lot in social media and commentators. And the reason it's historic is because Israel has enjoyed what we call the gift of, or the shield of impunity. And what that means is that whatever allegation is thrown at or made against Israel politically, against the politicians or against the military or against foot soldiers on the ground, nothing ever seems to happen in terms of accountability. And so what that means is that Israel's free to do what it does to Palestinians. It's free to occupy in a belligerent manner in the way that it sees fit. And regardless of what probably is tens of thousands of complaints in regards to allegations of war crimes or breaches of international law submitted also to the ICC, nothing has ever happened in terms of holding Israel and its actors accountable. The first time Karim Khan and his office have issued arrest warrants based on credible, carefully gathered evidence, which they think, or they state, as a result of the action that they're taking with regards to applying for arrest warrants, gives reasonable grounds for the allegation of war crimes to be made out. And not just war crimes, but crimes against humanity. It's a really important step in breaking that shield of impunity. And also, you know, where we saw with, when we discussed previously the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, despite the fact that allegations were made that there was a risk of genocide to Palestinians with regards to Israeli action. You know that Israel operates a really powerful propaganda tool, which it used to sort of try to unwind that and to distract and pretend that that's not what the ICJ ruling was. And now we've got real clear evidence that, or real clear position that the International Criminal Court thinks that are based on reasonable grounds, based on an evidential basis, that there are credible allegations of war crimes against Israel.
And strikingly, the ICC Prosecutor's Special Advisor on War Crimes, Kevin John Heller, says, as will become clear in time, the evidence is unequivocal. The 5 suspects whose arrest we seek are responsible for the crimes identified in the applications, all of them. Interestingly, Karim Khan, the ICC Prosecutor, told CNN that a senior elected leader, this I think is extremely relevant to our discussion, told him this court is built for Africa and for thugs like Putin. Just wondered about your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of the criticism has been leveled against the ICC. This exact sentence is the criticism has been leveled against the ICC because the ICC has been seen as and criticized for being a tool of Western interests to promote Western interests, protect Western interests against effectively the rest of the world. And we saw this in the history of the ICC in it targeting and many prosecuting Africans for alleged war crimes or even war crimes. And more recently, we saw this in a way. We saw some development with the arrest warrants with regards to Putin and Russia. And then you saw a complete disengagement, or what appeared to be a complete disengagement when it came to Israel and Palestinians and Israelis being accused of war crimes. Now, what people accused the ICC of doing was not following its mandate without fear or favor and without prejudice or without bias, and for targeting Western interests. Again, clearly what Karim Khan has done is reverse that. And what's really interesting about this, Owen, is that you see that shortly prior to the issuance of arrest warrants, Karim the ICC issued a press release which invoked Article 70, which was the unlawful interference with due process, with interference with its processes, and this is something that's really great that the ICC has dealt with these. This level of interference by actually accusing the individuals of potentially breaching their own statute themselves, and that means potentially finding themselves before the jurisdiction of the ICC, which frankly would be a great thing.
Well, I have to say, because if we look at the fact that Israel's leaders are accused of war crimes and crimes against humanity, given Western states have armed them to the teeth, you would think that by definition criminalizes them. But let's talk about Britain. Let's talk about the British government. I would love you to name some names. I know you're not going to do that, unfortunately. I'm making a list. I'm checking it twice. But, we've all got a list. What's the general gist of the case against British politicians without naming names?
So I'm gonna start by criticizing myself and my own work, right? So you know, Owen, that we got an arrest warrant for Zippy Lively in 2009. A British court issued that based on evidence very similar to the ICC, based on war crimes. And what happened immediately after that was that politicians in the United Kingdom worked, tirelessly to create a shield for suspected war criminals that came from Israel and also anywhere else, by making it so that the Attorney General had to consent to a private arrest warrant application of the same kind that we did previously. So what that meant is that it's not so easy for me to present evidence to a court and say to a court, hey, look, here's a really clear evidence of a war crime, can I have an arrest warrant? And the mistake that I made, the criticism I have of myself, is that we always attacked, and I say legally attacked, the actors in the theatre of war. So Zippy Livni is a member of the Israeli War Cabinet, for example, soldiers on the ground, the generals that gave them instructions on what to do or commands on what to do. And what we didn't do is we didn't attack that really clear and vast framework behind the war machine, where you supply weapons, you supply political cover, you create shields of impunity. We just didn't deal with that. And when we saw the unfolding of the attack from Israel on Gaza, we decided to do something quite different. And you may recall that in October, November, we sent letters to British politicians, putting them on notice that if they supported in any way Israeli war crimes or alleged Israeli war crimes, they would potentially be complicit in those war crimes. So we issued notices. And then in January, what we decided to do is we provided, so just to go back slightly, we prepared and collected evidence to a British criminal evidential standard since October, November, up till the present day, and we continue to do so. That evidence is really clear. It's very strong. It's very credible, of primary war crimes and violations of international criminal law. That's been submitted to the police in January with regards to Israeli political leaders, Netanyahu and others, military commanders, British citizens that have traveled from the UK to Israel to fight with the IDF, but also, really importantly, 4 British ministers and officials that we say were complicit in war crimes, either by providing political cover or the supply of weaponry And what we're planning on doing this week is expanding that with further evidential-based allegations for war crimes and also further suspects.
Now, listen to that. To be fair, a lot of people would have thought, if you said a year ago that the International Criminal Court would end up issuing arrest warrants against Benjamin Netanyahu and his defense minister, you'd have gone, that will never happen in my lifetime, probably. So that's a big caveat. But a lot of people might listen to this and think, wow, this is a gimmick, isn't it? This is never going to happen. Never going to get there. This is just won't. The rules of the game are such that throughout history, British politicians up to their necks in all sorts of terrible crimes, they get away with it. They know they can. They've got impunity. I wonder, do you think partly they treat Israeli impunity as well as a kind of collective insurance policy, which means they could do what they want because Israel's got impunity, and now that's disintegrating, that opens up a door? What's the general do you think the legal position or the legal response to my "this is just too good to be true" kind of approach?
I mean, it's a human frailty that when we take risks, we think that the consequences are never going to fall on us. I mean, it's just a way that people think. It's why people do extreme sports. It's why criminals behave in a criminal way. I'll never get caught. It'll never happen to me. That same principle applies to war crimes. And I think here we've got to understand and accept that there is a set of laws that apply or are supposed to apply in the Rome Statute to people across the globe. And it's very specific because the Rome Statute in particular removes state-level immunity from officials, and it's designed to do that. And by virtue of what's called the International Criminal Court Act, we've adopted the Rome Statute as British law. So what that means is that a head of state committing or complicit in war crimes doesn't have the usual immunity that they would have in a national jurisdiction from prosecution. And what it means in this scenario is that either the United Kingdom law enforcement agency, i.e. the police, should investigate and prosecute. But there's also another element to this. If they decide or they fail, they're ineffective in terms of prosecuting these politicians, then that politician, plus also potentially the people that are protecting them, i.e. the police or the prosecution service or even the Attorney General, can themselves be referred to the ICC for investigation under the Rome Statute. So it doesn't just end in a national domestic jurisdiction. And I'll also say to you that I've spent a significant amount of time, Owen, over this year, traveling the world, meeting with heads of state, meeting with foreign ministers, meeting with justice ministers. And I'll tell you, the appetite to prosecute people complicit in war crimes across the globe, particularly the global south, is quite high. There is a real consideration by foreign states and outside the UK that they want to hold not just Israelis, but people complicit in Israeli war crimes to account in their own jurisdictions. So yes, you're right. It might seem like a bit of a pipe dream here in the UK. It may seem like that the British police will not or may not want to prosecute. But let's not forget, the British court in 2009 did issue an arrest warrant for Zipper Livni. People thought that would be impossible. The ICC has issued an application for an arrest warrant now. People thought that was impossible. South Africa initiated the Genocide Convention at the ICJ. People thought that was impossible. You know, we're setting precedent daily at the moment. The evidence is so overwhelming. I would be surprised if the British police didn't act in the way that they were designed to do, which is appropriate without fear or favour, and actually investigate British politicians that are complicit in war crimes. And I just want to say something. I know our government at the moment is stating that they have legal advice, if you like, that they are not potentially committing war crimes. Well, look, the evidence is becoming overwhelming. The ICJ has made very specific rulings. The ICC now has stated publicly that it has sufficient evidence to apply for arrest warrants. The British politicians will not be able to rely on a lawyer telling them that war crimes are not happening in the context of that massive weight of evidence. And let's not forget that Karim Khan at the ICC also put together and invoked legal advice, independent legal advice, from a significant number of not just lawyers, but also academics, legal academics. And that advice was very clear and unequivocal that his application for arrest warrants for both Hamas and Israeli alleged or suspected war criminals was the right thing to do and should proceed. And it should be probably noted that a significant number of those lawyers are British lawyers. So the advice, I wouldn't be very confident if I was a member of the Foreign Office or Ministry of Trade, for example, relying on the advice that they're getting to use that as a shield to protect them from war crimes. I don't think that's going to work.
Just a couple of, I think, relevant pieces of potential evidence. And I'm not saying this to, for example, put David Cameron's name in the mix, because I know you're not going to name anyone, but I just think it's relevant that he of course, Lord David Cameron is a foreign secretary. Back in January, he was interrogated by the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, headed by Alicia Kearns, a Conservative MP, who's actually done a better job of scrutinising government policy over Gaza than, say, the opposition has. But he was questioned about legal advice, what legal advice he's got about Israel breaking international humanitarian law. And he really is the slipperiest politician available and refused to answer. You know, he said, I can't remember every bit of paper put in front of me. Alicia Kearns subsequently at a fundraiser, conservative fundraiser, was leaked saying that the government had been told that they were in violation of that Israel was in violation of international humanitarian law, which obviously then would mean Britain couldn't supply weapons or share intelligence. And the other is a letter he issued in response to Alicia Kearns about Israel's deliberate blocking of aid, which actually led to the resignation of Elon Levy, the Israeli spokesperson. Now, some might look at this letter and think you'd praise David Cameron for this, because what he did is go through what Israel was doing to deliberately block aid. But if the point I'm making is, if the government's then aware that Israel is, as detailed in this arrest warrant, systematically, deliberately blocking the essentials of life, which is what Karim Khan has alleged, then isn't that more of a confession? Does that all this incriminate them? Basically, the point I'm asking is this all showing that the government knew what was happening but still carried on giving diplomatic and military support for Israel?
Well, just to bridge both the last question and this, and making it clear that I'm not naming any individuals. And by the way, when I say bridge the last question, the fact that this is not a gimmick is that I'm not trying to draw publicity and attention on the issue by naming people, because actually I expect arrests. I expect arrest warrants, and they'll be named in due course. So that's one of the important sort of key identifiers as to why I'm not naming people, because I expect there to be some results. But with regards to the British government generally, I think the way to answer it without revealing who the people are.
I just mean the government's general overall position that they need collectively.
So if I was in the British government some time ago, just by switching on my TV set, just by listening to experts like Francesca Albanese, just listening to what UNRWA individuals and leaders are saying within that organization, I think I would have taken a different track already for fear of my own liability with regards to war crimes. And it becomes really easy, actually. If you flip this whole argument, and the ICC has also issued an application for members of Hamas. So if you flip it on its head and you look at the low level of evidence you need with regards to becoming potentially complicit in war crimes with regards to Hamas, because they're a proscribed organization in the UK, you might want to ask, the government might want to ask themselves, why the standard that their lawyers are providing is so different when it comes to complicity in war crimes or terrorist acts with regards to Hamas, and complicity with regards to war crimes with regards to Israel. The balance is very different. That's also another signifier that the standard that the government appears to be setting for itself is just not correct. I wouldn't be relying on the legal advice that the government is being given, and I doubt very much. I mean, I'll put my money where my mouth is, if you like, right? I doubt that the legal advice that the government has received so far tells them that Israel is not committing war crimes. I suspect it's saying there's a serious risk that it either already has or is likely to commit war crimes, which will put the government in an even more difficult position.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about wasn't just about politicians. So you tweeted out yesterday, this was in response to the attempt by Sky News to rewrite history about what actually happened. But you tweeted out, we will not allow those who support war crimes in Gaza to rewrite their roles. And you also said, we will be holding politicians and commentators who are complicit to account. This is not a game where you get to pretend you were not involved in the murder of thousands. Justice is coming for you too. What do you mean by that? When we're talking about commentators, what we're talking about?
Yeah, so complicity isn't just supplying weapons or political cover or a shield of impunity. Complicity is also providing that political and social cover for war crimes and encouraging it. Okay, so aiding, abetting, or in other ways supporting or encouraging the commission of a crime. And so we've been gathering evidence with regards to people in sort of the public arena, whether they be official Israeli commentators and spokespeople, whether they be journalists, whether they be media institutions, that go beyond freedom of speech. So freedom of speech, completely acceptable. I don't have any issue with people making, including lawyers and including journalists, making comment about why something might be a war crime or why something might not be a war crime. That's perfectly legitimate debate. But when you take it one step further, when you potentially encourage acts of criminal acts, like, for example, you categorize or you promote the concept of dehumanization of Palestinians, and you endorse acts against civilians, which you categorize as being legitimate warfare or justified in international humanitarian law when it clearly isn't, and you encourage that activity, whether you're a commentator or an official spokesperson or just a regular person on the street, you run the risk of becoming complicit in war crimes. And what we've been doing at the ICJP is we've been collecting that evidence too, because it's really important that those people that have encouraged and supported the commission of crimes are held accountable for those crimes too. And so our complaint will be expanding as a next stage into looking at those commentators and supplying the police with the evidence in relation to those individuals so they can carry out their investigation under their own statute with regards to that category too.
So just on that, just finally, I mean, because some will go, oh, this is an attack on freedom of speech. You're going after journalists now. As a journalist myself, I have the right to obviously freedom of speech, but I don't have the right, say in the case of to incite to say racist incitement or violent incitement within the context of the UK, can I? I can't. If I wrote an article or I tweeted out something which was inciting violence on the streets, then I would be criminally liable for that. Is this it's the same principle? You can't incite and support war crimes. That's the same way you can't support other crimes.
I'll give you a singular example, right? The defunding of UNRWA is based on a dossier which didn't really contain the evidence that it said on the tin, right? It didn't contain that evidence. And that resulted in states across the globe, across the West particularly, defunding UNRWA and removing funding, which then ended up supporting Israel's use of starvation as a weapon of war, which is a complaint that we're likely to submit in the coming days. If you're a journalist and you promoted that document and you acted in a way where you made it a credible document without analyzing it properly and supported the defunding of UNRWA by things that you've done and said, with the knowledge that the result of that would be the unfair defunding of UNRWA and then result in the continuing starvation or famine of people in Palestine, that makes you complicit in that crime. And there is criminal liability attached to that. That's not freedom of speech. That's you purposely misrepresenting a document and potentially with support from the main perpetrator. Now, if you can prove that, that makes the complicity stronger. If you can't prove that, then the complicity is still there. And a perfect example, historic example, is the use of radio stations in Rwanda, where apparent journalists were supporting a population to attack another population, explaining why it was really important, dehumanizing a group of people. It's exactly the same, and people were prosecuted for that.
People forget in Rwanda they argued on the basis of self-defense. The Hutu extremists claimed that the Tutsi rebel force were going to commit genocide against Hutus unless they killed them first. The history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes, and I think people forget that the history of the use of terrible crimes committed in the name of self-defense, and people aren't often aware of just how extensive that history is. Just finally, just to everyone, this brilliant work has been crowdfunded, so I will include a link in the description, and that's for the International Centre of Justice for Palestinians website, so you can throw in some money if you believe that this complicity needs to face justice, because not just because of justice for those who've been slaughtered, but because unless there is justice, these horrors will happen again and again, precisely because those guilty, or those those who are alleged to have committed criminal complicity think they can get away with anything. And unless there is justice, then that will keep happening over and over and over again. So this isn't just about the Palestinian people. This goes much wider than that. It's about how do we stop these horrors constantly repeating themselves, and that means people need to be held to account. So do go and click on that link and give whatever you can. Press like, subscribe, leave your comments. But Tayab, really, really appreciate it and your brilliant work.
Thanks very much, Ryan.
Thank you for that. Sorry, I asked a lot, but oh God. Click back the end. Didn't need that. That was great.